Hi everyone, really good to see you. So today what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how children go through the process of reading and what it is that you actually need to think about when you're teaching your child to read and the difficulties that they have and why they have the difficulties. And actually, you might be quite surprised at what tell you. So before I go into all of that, in case you don't know me, my name's Sabina Bashir. I've been a teacher for 30 years now. And I also tutor children for English and maths and also prepare them for their GCSE foundation level English and maths. So, what I'm going to do today is I'm going to distill for you 30 years of teaching that I've acquired to help children learn to read because it is such a passion of mine. It is so important that children learn to read because they use it in everything. They need to be able to read to go out shopping, to go and buy groceries, to get a bank account, anything, everything requires reading. So, if they can't read well, it's going to hamper their quality of life in so many different ways. So it is really, really important that they learn to read well. So without wasting any more time, what I'm going to do first of all is explain to you how reading occurs in the sense of what it is made up of, the building blocks that makes up reading, and how children need to learn to read for meaning. And that is the crux of it all. So when children actually have tests in school and they're being taught how to read in school, they're being taught to understand comprehension. So I'm going to go into all of these words soon, but I just want to give you an idea of the things that we're going to cover. So the first thing that we're going to look at is how reading is split into two parts. Now, a lot of people don't understand that it is actually split into two parts. Now, the first part is the mechanics of reading, okay? And the second part is what we call the comprehension of reading. So we're going to look at the mechanics first because that is the bit that you are going to spend most of your time. If you've got very young children, that is what you're going to be concentrating on when you teach your child. That's the bit that you understand. The second part is what schools tend to focus on more, especially in the higher years, but I will cover that later on in the video. So to start off with the mechanics. Now, the mechanics are made up of, we've got words, obviously, but not only do we have words, we need to pronounce the words correctly. So children don't just learn words for the sake of learning words. They need to be able to pronounce them because by pronouncing them incorrectly, you can actually get a different meaning to the word. So, for example, if we see the word, well, if you see this word, what is this word? It says read or read. So we can read the book or the book has been read. Okay, so depending on how you pronounce it, it has a different meaning. See what I mean? So the first thing children need to be able to do is actually recognize the words on a page. They need to know what they are, and then they need to be able to pronounce them correctly so they get the correct meaning of the word. That applies in most cases. The next part is they need to be able to recognize those words in a sentence. Now, you might think, well, if they know the word, they should be able to read it in a sentence. But let me give you this sentence. If I give you a sentence that has lots of words in it, your brain needs to process more words. So you need to know what the word is, you need to know how to pronounce it. You need to know what the next word is, you need to know how to pronounce it. That is a lot more effort for your brain to process. Now, for a young child, that can be really, really tricky. That can be difficult. So, depending on how old they are, if it's a really young child, now you can start teaching your child words from when they're 2 years old. So they can see words on a card and you show them the card and they can read the word. Then you show them another card and they can read the word. And that's brilliant. It's fantastic that they can do that. But when you put the words together in a string, so it's a sentence, that's when they will start to have difficulty because then their brain has to process more words at the same time. Okay, so there's a lot of developmental work that has to happen within a child's brain before they can process the words. Okay, so if you're starting to teach your child to read, then by all means, give them single words to learn and memorize and recognize. That's fabulous. They can start that from even 18 months. You can say to them, they don't even need to pronounce it. You can say, right, find me the word cat. And you had some cards and they find the word that says cat. Find me the word dog. Find me the word the. So they can do that. They don't even need to say anything, but they should be able to, they can, even at a very young age, be able to recognize words with the picture of the word, let's say, if you present it to them. Not necessarily the pronunciation, because pronunciation requires you to have the vocal cords produced and developed well so that pronunciation is possible. They need to be able to coordinate their tongue, their mouth, their lips. So that requires another mechanical structure for them, for their brains to then be able to process in order for them to say the words. So that's a different situation altogether. So we have to take children's development into consideration when we're teaching them to read. So if we have a child, let's say we get a library book and they, you know that they know a collection of words because you've used flashcards and you've taught them some words and you say to them, oh, where is that word in this text? Well, that's a sea of words, and you're trying to get them to identify their particular word in that sea of letters. That is going to be tricky. That's going to be difficult because the brain has to cancel out all these other words and pinpoint the word that they've been learning on the cards. And that can be really hard. Okay, so only when they get to maybe about 3, 4 years old will they be able to recognize words in a small amount of text or even in a sentence, because the brain has to then cancel out the other words. So children first need to recognize a word and they need to be able to pronounce it correctly. That's the second part. And then the next part is they need to be able to recognize that word in a sentence, preferably a sentence with no more than 4 words, just so that they can identify each word. Or even if you teach them words and you put them into the sentence, then, for example, if you teach them the word I, love, and then cat, and they recognize the word I, they recognize the word love, and they recognize the word cats, then they can then identify I, love, and cats. And then if you put them in a sentence, they should be able to recognize them when they're together. So then that gives them the building blocks of how sentences are constructed. Okay, so then moving on from there, these are called sight words. So when they're just learning words on a flashcard, we call those sight words. So they see them and they say them. Okay, see and say, see and say. Those are sight words. Now there are a group of sight words that cannot be sounded out. Now you may be familiar with your child's teacher saying, "Oh, but they're learning phonics in school." Now I need to make a point about this because in school, schools follow a particular system, okay? And teachers are expected to follow that system. There's some building work going on. I hope that's not distracting you. So, if you're in a school system, you have to follow what's called the school policy. So as a teacher, I would go into a school and I would teach children how to read following the school policy. Now, as a parent, I don't have to follow a policy. Okay, so let's just make that clear. So when your child is in school, the teacher will tell you that they're learning certain words, they're learning how to read in a particular way, and they are telling you that because that is their school policy. If your child went to a different school, they might have a different school policy. Okay, so the way they teach in school is not necessarily the same in every school because they have their own policies. Now, so personally, there is a particular way of teaching a child to read that I like, that I feel at home is more beneficial than the school policy. Okay, so the way I'm going to teach you might not necessarily be the same as what your child will be learning in school. but it would be more beneficial for you to follow the process that I use, because you're at home, not in school, and you're not teaching, 30 children or 15 children or groups of children at a time. You're teaching your child. So the way I'm going to explain it to you is for an individual child at home, not necessarily following a school policy. And also, your child might not learn to read until they get to like 4 years old, 5 years old, when they're in the reception class in kindergarten. Whereas you might want to start teaching your child to read from when they're 18 months old, 2 years old. So you're not going to be following the same process that they follow. So for those reasons, I started to teach my children, my own children at home, to read from when they were 18 months old. I used flashcards because I needed them to learn sight words. Now, sight words are words where, like for example, the. You're not going to phonetically sound out the word the, to her air. To her air does not make the. Okay. And there are other words, there's 100 words that children need to know, which are sight words that cannot be sounded out using phonetics. You just need to see the word and you need to say the word. So I've got a list of these, which you can download from the website. I'll give you the links and everything at the bottom of this video when I finished. So there are 100 words that children need to be able to see and say when they see them. Okay, so those are sight words. So the first thing I would do when I'm teaching a child is teach the sight words first. All right, schools don't do that. Schools tend to go into the phonetics and fit the sight words in between. Now, personally for me, because I would be teaching from a much younger age, I don't teach phonetics to a child who is, 18 months old. That is just not a thing. You don't do that. That's just too complicated. Their brain won't be able to process it. Sight words is fine. Cat, picture of a cat, dog, picture of a dog, chair, all the nouns that have pictures, start with those, because then they can recognize the words with the pictures. So that's what I would do from a very young age. Even go to the library, you'll get the books that have the hard, the thick books, and they have one word, one picture, one word, one picture. Those are perfectly fine. So the child can recognize a word and recognize the picture. Happy days, that is really, really useful for very young children. And the idea is to build up the vocabulary. So do that initially when your child is really young. And you can get loads of books with all the sight words in. So then you would then move up to, once they are familiar with sight words, putting the sight words that they know together. Don't expect them to find words that they don't know in a string of words like a sentence, because if they don't know the other words, it's going to mess with their brain. That you're expecting them to do a lot. So put the words that they already know into a sentence. Teach them words that you can put into a sentence. So that's the second thing, so that they can recognize words in a sentence. It just helps with brain development. It just makes things easier. It'll make things easier for you as well. So once they've done that, then, and they have some understanding of sight words, then you can go into teaching them the phonics. And synthetic phonics is better than the traditional phonics that you and I probably learned when we were in school. Now, just to give you an idea of what synthetic phonics is. So if we take the letter L, now when I was at school, I was taught L, the sound for L was L. We don't say that now. In school, in synthetic phonics, the sound for L is L. Okay, so when you have the word table, it's table, not table. Okay, so it doesn't fit. The sound doesn't always fit depending on the word. So it's using the actual sound that the child would use in a word that we use in synthetic phonics. The other letter that's changed is R. So when I was at school, the R would have been a R. We don't say R now, we say Okay, so those are a few distinctions between synthetic phonics and traditional phonics that we would have learned in school. So on top of that, the phonics can get really tricky. Well, the phonics does get really tricky, and I'll show you how it gets really tricky in these words here. So we have the sound here, O-U-G-H, okay? So this sound can be pronounced in so many different ways, which is what makes English so difficult. And I'm telling you this because when a child comes across it, this is what causes them so much frustration. So in the word through, O-U-G-H makes the oo sound. In the word bow, the O-U-G-H makes an ow sound. And then in the word thorough, the O-U-G-H makes a sound. Can you see how it gets really tricky? So this sound changes depending on the word. So it gets really difficult. So then we have the homophones and the homonyms really, cause children so many problems. And then you've got things like the split digraphs. So for example, when I was at school, I learned it as magic E. The magic E changes the letter in the middle to the letter sound. So, for example, when children are learning phonics, you might be tempted to go, oh, all the letters have a sound. But there are some words that actually use the letter itself. So, for example, let me explain. So, if I have the word apple, so apple starts with a sound, but the word able starts with a sound. So there are some words that have the sound, which is the synthetic phonic sound, but then it also has the letter sound, which is a. Okay, so children need to know that some words have the letter sound and some words have the phonetic sound. Another word would be circle. So in circle, we have two C's. So we have the S sound at the beginning of circle, and then we have the K sound in the middle of circle. Okay, so the two C's have a different sound. This is where it gets really challenging for children because they get confused and they're like, oh, which sound is it? And this is where we teach children the phonics, but the idea is not for them to learn phonics and then approach every single word they see in a book and go s, e, k, u, e, and sound every letter out. What they need to do is they learn the word using the phonetic key, and then they need to memorize that word and then put it into the memory bank so that when they have a spelling test, they know how to spell it. So a lot of people mistake the use of phonics and think, oh, well, once they've learned phonics, they can say any word. But that isn't the point. The point of phonics is not to then go around reading every single word in a book by phonetically sounding it out. The point of phonics is to help you decode the word so you know what it is. And once you know what it is, you then have to memorize it and then make it into a sight word. Okay, so all these words that children learn phonetically is just to help them understand what the word is. Once they know it, transfer it to long-term memory as a sight word. So effectively, they are going to learn these words as sight words because they need to for the purpose of spelling the words. So they need to know what the word looks like. They need to be able to spell them. Okay, so we're still on the mechanics of teaching your child how to read. So we've done, they need to learn words, sight words. They need to be able to decode words using the phonics with lots of different rules. Too many for me to go into in this video. Probably make another video about that. Then they need to be able to pronounce the words correctly, like read and read. Looks the same, pronounced differently. So they then need to, once they can do that, there's also inflection. So they might read the words in a sentence, but depending on where the word is in a sentence, there might be a different inflection, meaning that your voice might go up, your voice might go down, depending on where the word is and what type of sentence they're reading. So, for example, if it's a question, the inflection of the word will go up the end, will go up at the end. So, and then you have a question mark at the end. For example, you say, why are you doing that? So can you see my voice went up and then down, as opposed to the cat is in the garden. Okay, so now my voice is more even. So when you are asking questions, you have to put inflection into the words that you say in order to get the meaning of the words as well. So it's not just about pronouncing the words correctly, it's also about presenting the words in a way that shows that it's either a question or a statement or it's a command, like put that down. So, there's more force put into the words in order to show what type of sentence they're saying, okay? Or they're reading even. So, those are the mechanics of the words. Now, that is the part that most parents focus on. They focus on the mechanics, and what tends to happen is children become very good at what we call mechanical reading. Okay, so they know the words, they know how to pronounce them, they see them in a string of words, they see them in sentences, and they read them beautifully. They are so good. And you think, yay, my child can read. They're so good. They're so fluent. The inflection's correct, and they can read all this text, and they're fantastic readers. No, not how it works. Because that is just the first part of reading. Then we get to the second part of reading, which is the tricky part. Now, the second part is what we call comprehension. Now, comprehension is what teachers tend to focus more on in school. Now, comprehension is understanding what they've read. That is not the same as mechanical reading. Mechanical reading is similar to me giving you some text in French, and let's pretend you can't read French, and you knowing what all the words are, and you can say them, but you have absolutely no idea what it means. Le chat dans la maison. Right. What does that mean? I know how to say it. I know how to pronounce it badly, but nevertheless. But what do the words mean? So this is where children come unstuck. They can see the words in print. They can read the words. And you think because they can read it, they understand it. No, you can read anything, but not have a clue what it means. And that is the problem children have when it comes to reading. And that is a problem you have when you think your child can read beautifully and then they get really low test marks. And you think, well, they can read. Why did they get a low test mark? And it's because they're not understanding what they're reading. And that's what comprehension is about. It's about understanding the text, reading for meaning. What is the meaning of that sentence? What is the meaning of that word in that text? Okay, so for comprehension, we then have several parts to that as well. Now, the main part when your child is really young is retrieval. So they may read a piece of text and then they have to retrieve information from that text, meaning they'll have a question that says something like, what time of day was it in the text? And it might say in the text, at night time, the two owls were sitting in the tree. So then they look at the text and they go, oh, it was nighttime because it says it was nighttime and the owls were sitting in the tree. Straightforward. Retrieval questions are simple and easy. So you just find the word that the question is asking for. But then we have inference questions. And that's when things start to get trickier because it might say, what time of day was it? And it doesn't say what time of day it is. Instead, it says something like, as Joe ran down the stairs to breakfast, he remembered that it was a really important day. It doesn't say what time of day it is, but it does give you a clue to what time of day it is because it said Joe ran down to breakfast. Well, what time of day is it if he's going to have breakfast? It's the morning. Okay? usually. So you have to then understand from the text the meaning of the text. And this is where children get unstuck because they don't understand the meaning. So when you're teaching your child to read, you then not only need to make sure that they're reading the words correctly, you need to check that they're understanding the meaning. And the way you do that is ask them the question. So what happened in this bit that you read? In this paragraph, what did it say? What did this person do? Oh, that was really terrible. Why? What happened? And and you have to investigate and you need to question them and you need to check that they actually understand what they've read. And that is where children struggle the most because many, many, many children do not read for meaning. They read mechanically. My own daughter, she read beautifully. She had no idea what she was reading, but she read beautifully. She had the intonation, she had the inflection, she had the pronunciation, she had it all. She could read beautifully, and I was sitting there thinking, oh, she can read, that's brilliant. No, because when she had to do a comprehension, she couldn't answer the questions because she didn't know what the sentences actually meant. So that's why when you are sitting there and you're listening to your child read, double check that they're actually understanding what they're reading. And the other thing with listening to somebody else read, especially in English, English is so complicated because it has things like metaphors in there. So the meaning is not exactly the meaning in the book or in the text. It could say something like, the snow lay like a blanket on the ground. Well, I know and you know that there isn't a blanket on the ground. It's saying that the snow was like a blanket on the ground. Okay, but a child might read the word blanket and think, huh? There's a blanket on the ground. Why is there a blanket on the ground? And totally have missed the fact that it says the snow lay like a blanket on the ground. Or it might just say a blanket of snow. And they ignore the word snow and go, blanket, blanket on the ground. Why is there a blanket on the ground? Do you know? So there are metaphorical sayings, there are similes, there is figurative language in the text that children might not understand. So, for example, you might have something like the rain tiptoed across the garden path. Now, if the rain's tiptoeing across the garden path, does that mean that it's torrential rain and it's pouring down? Or does it mean it's just lightly spitting? So it sounds obvious to an adult, but when a child reads that in the text, the rain tiptoed along the ground, they're just going to be focusing on the fact that the rain's tiptoeing. What do you mean it's tiptoeing? Okay, they don't get it. They don't understand that it's referring to the fact that it's just lightly spitting. Or if it says the rain banged on the windows, or it hammered on the windows. Well, what does it mean it hammered on the windows, it banged on the windows? It means it's really forceful rain. Okay, so there's words that are used metaphorically or figuratively that children don't always understand. So you need to double check that they understand what they're reading. And that's where a lot of confusion comes from. So I hope you found that helpful. I hope you found that useful. So the next time you're reading with your child, check not only are they pronouncing the words correctly, are they using the right inflection and intonation and pronunciation? A lot there to get round in their heads, but also that they are reading for meaning, because that is what they are actually tested on in a test. They're not tested on the oral spoken language, they're tested on what do they actually understand from the text that they read. So I hope to see you again in another video. Hope you found that useful, and subscribe, like, follow, whatever, and I'll see you next time. Bye.